Okay, good afternoon everyone to special lectures and discussions on the topic of academic publishing in international journals, the main issues. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly give some introduction about how this public talk has come about in this afternoon. This special lectures is organized by Chiang Mai Universities in collaboration with the ongoing working group project toward the International Conference on Thai Studies, which Chiang Mai University will be the host next year. So this is part of the process whereby we trying to get staff and postgraduate students within Chiang Mai universities to be in this atmosphere of academic environment. And today we are really lucky to have Professor Dr. Victor King. I assume that many of you have known his name or have read his work from various disciplines, but I'll introduce briefly about Professor King before he start his lectures today. สวัสดีครับก็วันนี้นะครับขอต้อนรับเข้าสู่กิจกรรมนะครับเป็นเสวนาสาธารณะนะครับชื่อ Academic Publishing นะครับ in International Journals the main issues นะครับการตีพิมพ์นะครับในวารสารวิชาการนานาชาตินะครับซึ่งวันนี้เราได้รับเกียรติจากศาสตราจารย์ดร. วิกเตอร์คิงนะครับก็จะมาให้มาเสวนานะครับมาพูดแนะนำแล้วก็พูดถึงว่าการตีพิมพ์ในระดับวารสารนานาชาติมีอะไรบ้างนะครับเสวนาในวันนี้นะครับจัดโดยมหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่นะครับโดยมีองค์กรหลายองค์กรนะครับร่วมกันจัดนะฮะก็มีมหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่เองนะครับผมแล้วก็ศูนย์บริหารงานวิจัยนะครับแล้วก็เป็นของทีมงานเรียกว่าเป็นทีมงานจัดประชุมนานาชาติไทยศึกษานะครับซึ่งมหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่จะเป็นเจ้าภาพในปีหน้านะครับเดือนกรกฎาคมใช่ไหมฮะกรกฎาคมนะครับผมสำหรับเสวนาในวันนี้นะครับจะเป็นภาษาอังกฤษเป็นหลักนะครับผมแล้วก็ผมจะทำหน้าที่เป็นแชร์นะครับผมพระสุทธิ์ลาสุขะจากคณะมนุษยศาสตร์นะครับจะทำหน้าที่เป็นแชร์นะครับคอยโมเดเลตแล้วก็จะคอยสรุปเป็นภาษาไทยบางพาร์ทที่สำคัญให้นะครับผมหรือว่าถ้าผู้เข้าร่วมท่านใดไม่ติดข้อสงสัยหรือใดประการใดเนี่ยเรามีเวลาประมาณ2ชั่วโมงกว่าๆนะครับถึง3ชั่วโมงก็สามารถถามได้ตอนหลังนะครับผมก็จะพยายามตอบคำถามทั้งภาษาไทยและภาษาอังกฤษนะครับแล้วก็อีกประเด็นหนึ่งที่สำคัญคือก่อนที่จะเริ่มนะครับก็อยากจะบอกว่านี่เป็นโครงการหนึ่งนะครับของสิ่งที่มหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่กำลังพยายามที่จะจัดให้ทั้งพนักงานทั้งเจ้าหน้าที่ทั้งอาจารย์บุคลากรต่างๆในมหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่นะครับได้เข้าสู่บรรยากาศทางวิชาการนะครับซึ่งมหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่จะเป็นเจ้าภาพจัดงานไทยศึกษานะครับในปีหน้านะครับก็วันนี้เป็นท็อปิกที่สำคัญหนึ่งนะครับที่คิดว่าจะเป็นประโยชน์กับทุกท่านนะครับ So without further ado, I'll give this stage to Professor King to start with his talk today. Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words. As you see from the first slide, I've been an adjunct professor in Chiang Mai University over the last year. My contract has just finished with CMU. As you also see, I'm retired from the UK. I'm still the Emeritus Professor at the University of Leeds in Yorkshire, in the north of England. And I also do some work for the School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London, and so I have a professorial research association with that university. I suppose I'll say a little bit about myself as well, so you get perhaps some.
Sorry, I should have introduced your work first, but
no,
you already said it. Sorry.
So I took early retirement from University of Leeds some 5 years ago. I was still relatively young. I retired before the usual retirement age in the UK because I wanted to carry on doing some of my own personal research. So I then immediately went to University of Brunei Darussalam. I've been teaching there in their undergraduate program. And then 2014, I first came to Chiang Mai University, and I was teaching in the your Research Center for Sustainable Development, and I was teaching on the MA in Development Studies here, which I very much enjoyed, and I always enjoy revisiting Chiang Mai. It's a beautiful city, and I like working in the university. So my academic background, I first got my first lectureship in the early 1970s. Well over 40 years ago, I've been in sort of academic life, academic career, and so on. My disciplinary background is sociology and anthropology, but most of my career has been working in multidisciplinary area studies. So Southeast Asian studies, more generally Asian studies when I was at the University of Leeds. And I was there for 7 years in Leeds as director of a research center. It was set up as a East Asian studies center specializing in Chinese and Japanese studies. Though I'm not a Chinese and Japanese specialist, my field is Southeast Asia, and most of my research career has been undertaken in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, more recently in Thailand, but I speak a little bit of Thai, but not much, so I have to work through intermediaries and interpreters and so on, and I've been doing some joint research here in the field of my recent interest is tourism and heritage, and I've just finished an edited book on UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Southeast Asia. So while I was here, we did work in Ayutthaya, Sukhothai, but also Khao Yai National Park. We were looking at heritage across cultural sites as well as natural sites, national parks and so on. And then we did work in Vietnam, at Hoi An in particular, up in North Vietnam as well. Most recently I was in the Philippines, and we were doing work on heritage sites in Luzon, just outside Manila. And then I was working in Malacca, in Malaysia. That's a World Heritage Site as well. In Penang, in Indonesia. So we covered a fairly broad range of sites, and so I was editing a book on that. Perhaps it's a little bit presumptuous of me to tell you or to indicate some of the main issues in academic publishing. Given my recent experience, I've just had a paper rejected from 3 major periodicals, international journals. In one case, the review was entirely hostile and thought my work was obviously not up to standard. In 2 other cases, they've asked for revisions, and I was working. This is actually it's a joint paper I've written with, you may know his name because he's worked in Thailand for a long period of time, Professor Eric Cohen, who I was working with here. We were doing some seminar work here last year and the year before, and we were getting very, very interested in what we call the globalized academic publishing regime. How academic publishing has become globalized, and how it's controlled, and who are the gatekeepers, as it were. And from that kind of experience, I maybe would like to say a little bit about how I think you might be able to get published, but it's a really, really tough business now. getting into leading academic journals. So what I was actually doing with Eric Cohen, and there's another guy, Dr. Scott Cohen, who's based in the UK, American, but he's based in the UK. They're both Cohens, but they're not related, apparently. But those have been my two co-authors looking at what we call this globalized academic publishing regime and trying to make sense of it. And we've actually taken examples, because we all work in the tourism studies field. And I shall show you some slides on this. We've actually taken examples from tourism studies journals. And I can give you some indication of our experience in this field. So my involvement, as I've said before, though my background is sociology, anthropology, I started life as a geographer as well, and then kind of converted into anthropology and sociology, and did my major field research in Indonesia before then developing my research in Malaysia. So my experience has largely been in this multidisciplinary field of Asian studies, area studies. These are some of the journals I've been involved with. I was very early on in my career in the 1980s on the editorial committee of what was then launched in the early 1980s, the Southeast Asian Journal of Social Science. It's now become the Asian Journal of Social Science, and it's published in Singapore. I'm no longer on that board. I was through the 1980s, 1990s. So I'm saying here up to 2000, these were some of my responsibilities in serving on editorial boards, international editorial advisory boards, and so on. I'm still involved in a set of publications called Studies in Third World Societies, based in the US. I was for a time on the advisory board of this Dutch journal. It's a foremost anthropology, social science journal in the Netherlands. Bijdragen tot de taal, land en volkenkunde. I'm no longer on that board, but I still publish in that journal, and I just sent a paper to them for consideration for publication. I've done a lot of work in Malaysia as well. I'm still on the advisory board of the journal Pertenika, Journal of Social Sciences and Humanities. I was for a time on the Singapore Journal of Tropical Geography International Advisory Board as well. And then from 2000, these are my major responsibilities, involvements in editorial work. On the International Advisory Committee of Sojourn, I don't know whether some of you might know this journal, published through the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore. I've been on that advisory committee for a fairly long period of time, and I have to do quite a lot of reviewing of submitted papers for them. In Brunei Darussalam as well, I've been on the Faculty of Social Science, Southeast Asia Multidisciplinary Journal as well. I'm still currently on the advisory board of East Asia, an international quarterly that's published through the University of Durham, and it's largely focusing on, East Asia, on China, Japan, Korea, but they also publish on Southeast Asia as well, and I'm on that board essentially to help them evaluate papers on Southeast Asia. I'm still currently on the editorial advisory board of Southeast Asia Research, which is a journal of the School of Oriental and African Studies. And very interesting, and I'll come to this in a moment about this whole globalization process. Southeast Asia Research was simply launched as a university journal in the University of London in SOAS. It's since been taken over by Sage publishers, and this is increasingly happening, as you probably know. Journals which have been launched within university publication systems are increasingly being taken over by major corporate publishers. And in the field of tourism studies, as you'll see in a moment, there are maybe half a dozen major corporate publishers which control most of the leading journals in tourism research. I'll give you some indication of that in a moment. I was for a time working for the University of Amsterdam Press as well in the Netherlands, and a recently launched journal which is, well, the chief editor is, you might have heard of his name, Professor James Scott, who's at Yale. He's the chief editor of that journal, but I'm on the editorial advisory board of that journal, and it's been launched by Sogang University in Seoul, and it's becoming a major publication for Southeast Asian research. I can continue, I suppose. I've just joined the editorial board of Asia Matters, Business, Culture and Theory, which has been launched at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. There's a journal actually edited and based in Pakistan, but controlled by a Canadian publisher, the International Journal of Humanities and Social Science Research. And what they're trying to do now, as many journals are, is to at least get Scopus listing for citation index purposes. So that journal is at the moment listed by Scopus, but it has ambitions to be in the near future. I've just accepted the position in Dr. Ploissy's newly launched journal at Chiang Mai University here, the Asian Journal of Tourism Research. Its first issue comes out this very month, and she certainly has ambitions to get Scopus listing within 2 years, if possible. That's very ambitious, actually, but I think she might be able to do it. I've just taken on a co-editor-in-chief responsibility for the journal Srivisarnvaja, which is a multidisciplinary journal of the Busan University of Foreign Studies in South Korea. They are not Scopus listed at the moment, but they have ambitions to be. They're in their 7th year of publication, and they used to publish in the Korean language. They then moved into English language publication, and they've been publishing in the English language for about 3 or 4 years, and they're now waiting for at least another year to try and get Scopus listing for their journal. Only just yesterday, I accepted the guest editorship of a journal that is based in Switzerland. It's entirely an e-journal called Sustainability. They have Scopus listing and ISI listing. I suppose for about 30 years I've been editing the Association of Southeast Asian Studies in the UK newsletter, as well, trying to keep up with international news about what's happening in Southeast Asia, but particularly from a UK perspective. And for over 20 years I've been on the editorial board of a journal that's University of Cambridge publishers called Modern Asian Studies. And it's very interesting. Some journals, they only give you maybe a 3-year term, and then they replace you. Maybe you can get an extension for a further 3 years. For some reason, Modern Asian Studies in Cambridge has kept me on their board for 20 odd years. They seem to have forgotten me, left me there, and not renewed my responsibility. So I just stay on the board. So let me now turn to the context of what we've actually been working on over this last year. And you'll see here the paper that we're trying to get published. It still hasn't been accepted by a journal. At my last count, it had gone through 16 revisions. We're constantly, Eric Cohen and Scott Cohen and myself, constantly in contact about this, and we keep revising. I say we've submitted it to 3 journals. One has outright rejected us. It's a desk rejection. And this increasingly happens now, that chief editors are very, very powerful people, and they will go through this particular journal, which is Annals of Tourism Research. It's based in the US, which is the top journal in tourism studies. It's been going for a very long period of time. We sent it to them, and we got an immediate desk rejection from the editor, who says that he didn't really think it was suitable for the remit of their particular journal, and we should try somewhere else. He didn't even put it out to review, an immediate desk rejection, so that we then recycled it, and we've now sent it to other publishers. Annals of Tourism Research, like most major journals, appoint from anywhere in the region of 2 to 5 external reviewers, all blind reviewed, usually double blind. Most journals will use 2 reviewers. Most recently, I had a paper reviewed in Singapore. It's now been accepted for publication, and I had 3 review comments on that paper. One was hostile, 2 were generally quite favorable, and the hostile review, although this is anonymous, when you're in this kind of field for a long period of time, you can guess who might be reviewing you, even though it's anonymous. And I guessed who this hostile review was from, because I was quite critical of his work. And his review came to 6 pages of closely typed commentary on my paper, saying he didn't agree with any of it, really. And I got 2 very favorable reviews, and on that basis it was decided by the journal that they would publish the paper, and it's just been published in Sojourn, in the Journal of Social Science Issues in Southeast Asia. So even though you feel you've been in this business for a long, long time, and you think you know what it's about, and so on, you still get, like me, you still get rejections, you still get hostile reviews, and so on. So I suppose my view is, don't be dispirited. I mean, if you are trying to get into the publication game, trying to get something published, expect disappointments, because it's a highly competitive business now. And I say it's highly controlled. This is why we're looking at it as a globalized system of academic publishing. And as I say, chief editors, editors-in-chief are now very, very powerful people. And if their journal is getting a large number of submissions, then desk rejection becomes a mechanism to simply eliminate 80 to 90% of what they receive. They don't even send them to review. As in our case, we're immediately desk rejected. And this is increasingly happening now in very popular leading journals in particular fields. So, as I say, don't be disappointed, or you feel that you're not reaching a level of quality and so on and so forth. I say it is so demanding now that you expect rejections, and you're very fortunate. Maybe you have a very high quality paper and it is accepted by reviewers without rejection. But in most cases, I think you will have to get used to the to disappointments, if you like. My position as adjunct professor, CMU are very demanding. They appointed me for 1 year here, and they paid me as well, which is very generous of them. But they wanted, at the end of my contract, to have evidence of 5 Scopus-listed international journal articles. And I was just saying to my colleague here who was introducing me, I didn't actually make it. I had 4. By April of this year, I was appointed from April to April last year to April this year. And your Research Administration Centre tasked me with getting 5 papers I got 4. I had to then explain to them that one paper was having to be revised, and so I would miss the deadline, but that I had evidence that it was likely to be published, and it has just been published and through Sage publishers. And I've been able to send your research admin center evidence that I've actually made the 5 papers in 1 year. I said to your director of RAC, this is very, very demanding, really. Okay, you know, CMU, they ask you to accept certain responsibilities if you sign up for a contract with them, but to actually get 5 papers in a year, and you know, you have to go through review processes, and this, you know, this can take time. I've published with certain journals, and it's taken me 2 years or more to go through all the revisions and ultimately to get the paper published. And my experience with Modern Asian Studies, the Cambridge journal that I'm on the editorial board of, they're now, they have a backlog now of publishing that is over 2 years. So even though you're accepted by the journal, it may be a considerable period of time before you actually get the paper published. So these were papers that I delivered to CMU as part of my responsibility, but in the meantime I've also been publishing in non-Scopus listed journals. Now, as I understand it, your university now really presses academic staff to publish at least in Scopus listed journals. And that's quite tough. I mean, there are a lot of journals around that are not Scopus listed, so you know, you don't tend to get in citation indexes if you publish with them. And the advantage of, you know, if it is ISI listed or Scopus listed, then you can get into citation indexes, and that's important for your profile, for promotion, and so on and so forth. But there are quite a number of journals that are not Scopus listed. One of them I've already referred to in South Korea, but they're trying to, you know, they're trying to up their game and get it Scopus listed within the next couple of years or so. I just put the comment here, a paper reviewed by a London journal, which has just been accepted. And the reviewer said, the author, that's me, tends to ramble. He has interesting things to say, but why does he take so long saying it? So I had to shorten the paper because the reviewer said it was far too long. I'm sorry, the print is a little bit small here, but I suppose these are just my tips. I mean, some of them are quite commonsensical, but I'm not saying anything wonderfully revealing in some of this. But I suppose these are basic points or tips that I would give to some of my colleagues and my PhD supervisees and so on in, you know, turning their thesis into a publication or into a series of papers. As I've already said, don't be disheartened, don't give up. There are always means of recycling papers. If you can't find home in a particular journal, you might have to change it around a bit, but then submit it to another journal. But what I'm saying here is that journals are becoming increasingly prescriptive. In other words, if you don't fit their particular remit, then it's likely to be a desk rejection, immediate rejection. They just say, no, we're not interested in this paper. It's beyond our particular set of interests, beyond our readership, and so on. What I would also say is, and this, I know it's difficult, but don't necessarily reject. If it's a desk rejection, then you have to. I mean, there's no way really of coming back to a chief editor who has rejected your paper. But if reviewers are not warm about your particular submission, and you're getting at least from, say, 2 or 3 reviewers, you're getting some positive remarks, but you're getting critical remarks as well, maybe from a reviewer who says, no, reject it. I usually don't give up. you go back to the journal and say, well, you know, why am I getting this hostile review, or why am I getting this highly critical review from this particular person, whoever it is, because usually it's anonymous unless you can guess who it might be. And I did have this experience with this Singapore journal, which was eventually published, and I got 2 pretty good reviews and a very hostile one, and I went back to the chief editor and say, look, you know, I don't agree with the comments of this reviewer, and I question it and so on. It's still up to you, you know, you can still reject my paper, but just listen to my arguments and see if you think they're worthwhile, and then maybe reconsider your decision. So I think, you know, don't necessarily give up if you're getting mixed reviews, some more positive than others. Keep to journal requirements. I mean, again, it's my experience from editors-in-chief of journals. If you don't actually meet even their format, their house style, they will reject it. I've had experience of this. They simply reject it. You haven't followed our house style. Your referencing isn't following our house style. Reject. So even the technicalities, if you like, of putting a paper together and getting the correct reference system, be very, very careful with it, because editors are looking for ways really of sifting, and if you haven't met their requirements, you know, they can reject it immediately as a desk rejection. If you're an early career publisher, I mean, I did this myself when I was trying to get into the publishing game over 40 years ago, is to try and sign up with someone who has a reputation. If you know of someone who is on an editorial board or an international advisory board, and who has perhaps, you know, some kind of reputation, and you know them, or they've supervised your work, or you've met them at a conference, or they've introduced your paper at a conference, go to them and see if they're interested, not just in reviewing and improving your paper, but maybe jointly publishing with you. It's worth a try. So you know, don't be shy in trying to approach someone who, you know, clearly does have membership of certain journals and does hopefully have some sort of international reputation. What I say here as well is, don't assume it's all about academic quality and objectivity. There are all kinds of gatekeepers to these journals, and it's an issue, you know, of trying to get into networks of publishing, which again might help you get your papers accepted by a particular journal. Use conferences as a means to raise your profile. I mean, that's very obvious, really, but and I think it's an increasing requirement now, certainly in my experience in the UK, of supervising PhD students, of getting them conference circuit and getting them presenting papers in international gatherings and so on. I mean, that's a very important way in to the system and to begin getting published. I'm saying start modestly, or you risk being disappointed. If you think you've got a really high quality piece of work, then fine, go for a leading journal. But again, in my experience, it's best to start rather more modestly, I think, and then build up from there. That is, and you'll be familiar with this, I think, from, you know, your own work and your own research. This is essentially the kind of template that you have to follow, and I think abstracts are really very, very useful. I mean, they clearly serve that purpose of you summarizing in as efficient, succinct way as possible what you're arguing. And this is a really good exercise, I think, for you. if you can't say within 100 to 150 words what you're actually wanting to convey to a readership, then you should maybe rethink it. You've got to, and some journals now will say you cannot write more than 100 words for an abstract, or in some cases 150 words for an abstract. And if you can't summarize it and capture what you're saying in that number of words, then I think you have to go away and rethink it and see how you can better present it. Keywords as well, of course, your introduction and aims, which obviously is incorporated into the abstract, a literature review and or a conceptual framework of some kind. We constantly now want some indication of methodology. I think when I started my career, methodology, or certainly in anthropology, methodology wasn't really such a serious issue. Now it is. That you have to demonstrate how you've approached your particular piece of research, what you've done, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, a combination of those approaches or whatever. Your results and discussion, conclusion, limitations, the future, and acknowledgement. I always look at the acknowledgements in a paper. I want to find out who the author has been advised by, and what kind of pedigree, what sort of context they've had in producing a piece of work. And this is a very, it seems to me, a very good guideline, a guidance for what field that person is working in, and who he or she has relied upon for advice, sent the paper to, and so on. And there again, yes, and references. Just getting back to the field that I've been publishing in more recently, to give you kind of a sense of the control of academic publishing now. There's a senior researcher in tourism studies, a guy called Bob McKercham, who's compiled a list of over 300 titles just in tourism, leisure, hospitality, events, exhibitions, management, heritage, and museum studies. 300 titles. Of those, the leading journals are controlled by conglomerates. Taylor and Francis is enormous in the publication, the globalized publication regime. Of those 300 journals, there are about 60 or so which are considered in some sense leading, but you get citation indexes and so on of them. Taylor and Francis controls 37 of those. It's an enormous publisher. The Dutch publisher Elsevier has another 12, and it has its own citation index. Emerald 8, Cognizant 8, Sage Publishers 6, Indoscience 4, Wiley's 3, Springer 2. They control most of the leading work in international publication, in tourism studies, and these other multidisciplinary journals. If you look at the top 10 journals, which is listed in CIMAGO Scopus, 8 of them are UK based, 1 in the US, 1 Dutch, all English language. It simply demonstrates what what you're sort of up against, really. You know, publishing in English and so on, and many of these are European-based, Western-based journals. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. The leading journal, which I've just been rejected from, excuse me, Annals of Tourism Research, published by Elsevier in the UK. The second leading journal, Tourism Management, also Elsevier, UK. Journal of Sustainable Tourism, published by Taylor and Francis, Routledge, UK. Journal of Service Management, Emerald, UK. International Journal of Hospitality Management, Elsevier, UK. International Journal of Tourism Research, Wiley, produced in the UK. Journal of Hospitality, Marketing and Management, Taylor and Francis again, Routledge, UK. Applied Geography, which publishes a lot in the leisure and tourism field. Elsevier, that's based in the Netherlands. International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management, Emerald, UK. Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Research, Sage. So we just show US. It just shows you, how globalized this academic publishing regime is, and where control lies. If you take the top 20, this was the subject of this paper that was rejected by Annals of Tourism Research. So I'm just sort of summarizing what I've been working with Eric Cohen and Scott Cohen. If you take the top 20, the dominance journals, the dominance of English language publications is even more pronounced. If you take the 11 to 20, again, 6 of those journals published in the UK, 3 in the USA, and 1 in the Netherlands, all in English. Thomson Reuters, they operate the ISI Web of Science citation index, has a list. They only list 44 journals in the category hospitality, leisure, sport, and tourism, which has some kind of international prominence, acceptability, and so on. Sports journals, 21. There are 23 journals in the tourism, leisure, hospitality field, and again, you see the control. Of these cited by ISI, Taylor and Francis, Routledge has 6, Elsevier again 6, Sage 4, Emerald 1, Wiley Blackwell 1. Only 5 of those 44 journals are published outside the large conglomerates. So it just shows you the degree of control. We also had a look at the citation ranking index of the Association of Business Schools, an international organization. They rank journals 1 to 4 star. And this is how they rate the top journals in the tourism studies field. None are ranked 4 star. The highest you'll get is 4 rated, which is Annals of Tourism Research. Tourism Management Journal of Travel Research is rated 3, is 4. 3 is Journal of Sustainable Tourism, the International Journal of Hospitality Management, International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management, those are rated 3. Tourism Recreation Research 2. Anatolia is a very, very interesting one. That started as a Turkish-based journal, and it's now been taken over by one of the major conglomerates. But it's the International Journal of Tourism and Hospitality Research, and at least it gets a 1 rating by the Association of Business Schools. I suppose this is my sort of background. I come back to the point about not getting too downhearted if you get rejection. So I say at least 10 years of writing and self-training. Maybe that's a bit too much. I started publishing in 1972, and it was much easier then to get published than it is now. But what I suggest is, if you're undertaking your own piece of research as a PhD student and so on, what you have to do, obviously, is build up knowledge of your field or domain and demonstrate that in your publications. I refer to it as the state of play or state of the art, to demonstrate that you're in command of a field of study. I think this is something else that maybe we take for granted, but I think it's worth saying. That in research publications, what you try to do is move from knowledge telling, which for me is recall and reproduction, to something I call knowledge crafting, where you demonstrate understanding, interpretation, evaluation, commentary, argument, rehearsing those arguments, testing and revising. And this is why I refer back to the paper that I've been working on with Eric Cohen, constant and continuous revision, really. I say this paper has gone through now 16 revisions, and maybe before it gets accepted, hopefully within the next several months, it probably is going to go through more revisions, I think. Again, we maybe take this for granted, but I think it's worth stating that a writer writing a piece of research has to hold an enormous amount of material in memory. And that's both short and long term. The longer you're in an academic career, the more long term, in a way, you become in going back to material that you were working with, using, and so on. In my own case, over 40 years ago. This is why, again, I say capture and hold it and understand an author's ideas. This is why it's so important to write an abstract and to refine that abstract and so on, to demonstrate succinctly what you're trying to demonstrate in your piece of work. Can you put yourself in the reader's shoes? Again, as I say, writing an abstract is a valuable exercise. And as we get increasingly busy in our academic life, I sit and read a piece of work now, and I think, why am I reading this? What is it exciting me at all? What am I learning from this? And if I begin to lose my attention in reading something, then clearly something is wrong, and it's likely then to be a rejected piece of work if you haven't grasped my attention and saying something important. Again, I think if you can look at standard manuals. I mean, this is extracted from, you go to Google, go to any search engine and look at what you have to do in constructing a piece of work, in writing a piece of work. And these tend to be the sorts of things that are mentioned. Recall, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation and critical ability. Now, I can't instruct you really in any of these things. I mean, it comes with time and so on, but these are areas I think that you have to bear in mind. Clearly, something that is clearly written, that again doesn't lose the reader, is important. Strongly argued, and arguments have components, really, that have some sort of logical structure and link one with another in the way in which you take the reader through what you're writing. Obviously well structured, and quite a number of journals now, not all, but quite a number expect you to subtitle, to actually break your argument down into sections and give those sections titles, subtitles, and so on. As I get increasingly older, I suppose, I hate footnotes. I don't know about you. I often think that if someone is, and I know historians, for example, because they're elaborating a particular point and so on and so forth, they tend to use footnotes much more than I think social scientists like myself. But I think that they are, for me, they're a real distraction. Endnotes are even worse. If I'm having to keep going back to the end of a particular paper or the end of a book because I'm having to consult endnotes, I get really annoyed. And I think to myself, why can't you say it in your narrative? Why do you have to keep footnoting or endnoting to elaborate something? And as I say, I know it's an important convention in academic work, but I think it's something that, I think there's a good habit in not relying too much on footnotes and endnotes, but trying to say it within the text. Take the reader through what you're trying to convey without, as I say here, a kind of distraction for me in this matter. If you look at some, sorry, am I? Yeah, okay. I'll try and skip through this now as quickly as possible because I've been talking for 45 minutes at least. I never start writing something with a blank piece of paper. This is something I was talking to Eric Cohn about when we were here at a seminar in February, and we were talking about the way in which you do research and the way in which you construct a paper or maybe eventually work out a monograph or a volume of some kind. I constantly carry a notebook with me, and I'm constantly thinking about something. And I never start with that blank piece of paper and think, well, now I'm going to write. I've always been thinking and rethinking and noting things down all the time, and then refining that and so on. I do it when I'm walking around this campus or walking around anywhere. You know, I've got a problem that I'm trying to sort out. Something is not coming, and I'm getting frustrated by it. And I'm constantly carrying this in my mind and thinking, well, on some occasions I get a bright idea, or I've thought about it and worked my way through this particular problem that I'm trying to formulate in a piece of writing. So what am I trying to say? And so I'm constantly noting, phrasing, almost a kind of brainstorming in a way with myself in reflecting about a piece of work. And then all these other things, of course, which I have to bear in mind. Can I begin to come up with a structure for what I want to say? This is obviously the first thing I think that an examiner of a PhD thesis will say: what is new, original, distinctive, interesting about this piece of work? And if it's not distinctive, it's not interesting, I don't think it's original in some sense, then for me, as an external examiner of PhDs, I've probably, in my career, read somewhere in the region of, at least 100 PhDs. And I've examined PhDs in the UK, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Oxford. I've done PhD work in the Netherlands, in Australia, in Singapore, in Malaysia, and so on. And that's my first major test. What is distinctive, new, original? What is the contribution which this piece of work is making? And then I have to say, and does the person writing it provide sufficient evidence to demonstrate and argue that case? I suppose again, another piece of advice I give my PhD supervisees, students who I'm supervising, is keep writing. Even if what you're writing in those first drafts is in some sense you're not happy with it, it doesn't seem coherent and so on, at least you're writing. And I constantly say to my students, if you don't give me anything to read, what am I supposed to do? You can come and talk to me about it constantly. You have to put it down on paper. You have to write. And then we can have a conversation about what you're doing. I'm also saying pick up some relevant reading. Don't read passively, constantly skim and scan and so on. I think I'm going to finish in a couple of minutes because these are, perhaps you can talk about these in a bit more detail, but again, if you look at websites, these are the kinds of things that you have to think about, I think, in the way in which you structure your writing. And these are all key words, I suppose, in all of this. Analysis, argument, comparison. I think comparison is terribly important. Myself as a regional studies person, though, for example, I don't read or speak Thai, if I'm working on some elements of Indonesian culture, for example, I constantly want to compare with other places, whether those be within the region, whether it be Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, or beyond that. And comparison is, for me, terribly important, and it's one key thing, I think, within certainly anthropology and sociology, within the social sciences. Comparison in relation to contrast, placing propositions in opposition to show the differences between them. And again, analysis is all part of critical judgment about things. Define, describe, discuss, evaluate, explain. And here too, you can have copies of my PowerPoint, just to refresh your mind about what I've been saying. Illustration, justification, outlining, proving, reviewing, summarizing, tracing. And that too, I suppose, really reinforcing what I've already been saying about the way in which you critically assess a piece of work and its relevance for what you're doing. And these, I think, in any academic field are, the key things that you should be thinking about when you're evaluating, when you're reading, when you're judging a piece of work. Relevance, are the arguments consistent, or are they contradictory in some way? Are they all relevant as well? Do the authors use arguments they know you'll agree with, but which are not relevant to the point they're making? Does an author use the same words to mean different things at different stages of the argument? That's what I refer to here as the fallacy of equivocation. Quite big words in English. Are there underlying assumptions that they haven't justified? Can you detect bias in what they're saying? Are they favoring one side of an argument, giving little attention to the side for which they seem to have least sympathy? For example, do they give only those reasons that support their case, omitting those that don't? That, for me, is the fallacy of special pleading. Again, is the evidence relevant? Is it strong enough to support the arguments? Is the author using untypical examples to demonstrate a particular case? Do they draw conclusions from statistics and examples which can't adequately support them? And do I agree, disagree with this? If not, why not? And there too, I suppose, when you're putting a piece of work together, or you're drafting out your PhD thesis or your piece of research, the constant issue is of editing and re-editing, reading through it several times, checking all the references in the text and the bibliography. Do quotations make sense? Again, footnotes, endnotes, are they relevant? The illustrations, are they relevant? And do they refer to particular sources which are well sourced? Think about copyright issues as well, and acknowledgements. That, I suppose, is my guidance on an introduction and conclusion. Make sure the introduction and conclusion cohere, that they relate to each other. The clear statement, again, which is illustrative in an abstract of the issue, topic, objective, rationale, and so on. Providing a structure or a map of what you're taking the reader through. I often find that I write introductions last. That it helps you to know what you're introducing, if you like, rather than trying to write the introduction first. And that, I suppose, as a conclusion, summarizing main points, picking up the theme of the introduction, suggesting the wider implications of what you're doing, predicting future trends in relation to what you've been demonstrating, and check that you've delivered on the promises and objectives made in the introduction. So, hopefully you get published. I say again, don't be disappointed if you're not. I've had several disappointments in my career. I just carry on, trying to do things better. Rejection is no reflection on you, I'm saying. It's part of the globalized publication regime. Bear in mind that there are vast numbers of scholars out there wanting to get published, and you're competing in that particular marketplace. And then the main consideration is what is special about your piece of work, and why do I want to read it? So with that, I'll finish. Thanks. And sorry if I've
no, that's
gone over time.
Still in time. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr.